welcome back. My name is Kathleen. I'm a registered psychologist. I like to make videos that help psychology students. I also like to make videos about things like study and health and psychology. If any of that interests you, please go and check out my YouTube channel. But in this video, I am focusing on the National Psychology exam. In this particular one, I'm looking at the communication section of the exam. For a little bit of context, if you don't already know, I completed the NP back in November 2023. I didn't have any help with the study. I did it all by myself and I passed on the first go. So I wanted to put together this video series that helps provisional psychologists. Basically, it's like a springboard to get you started with your study. It's really important for me to let you know that my video series doesn't ruin the integrity of the exam because we are simply looking at the NP curriculum and working out how you could develop a study approach for it. We also look at some practice exam questions that I use from the NP textbook or some that I've made up myself, just to get you in that mindset to think about how you might approach the National Psych exam study. A lot of time, effort, and money was spent on creating this series, so if you find it helpful, easy ways to show your support: give it a like, leave a comment, watch the video to the very end so that it helps get it out into the YouTube universe. Another thing you could do, which would really help in making this work more sustainable, is down below there's a little heart that says thanks. If you want to leave a small donation, that goes a long way in me producing more content like this for psych students. If you need that extra layer of support for your study prep, I've also developed a National Psych exam study planner, which is basically like a general guide breaking up the study into 10 weeks and what topics you could study when, along with a series of reflection questions and things to think about to help you dig deep with your study. So if you're interested in that, there's a link for it down below in the description of this video. Finally, I just want to let you know that I'm currently growing on Instagram and TikTok. On those platforms, I'm trying to create more of a community. I'm sharing things like my daily routine, working as a psychologist, motivational sort of content, also books that I'm reading, podcasts that I'd recommend, things like that. So if you'd find any of that interesting and you want to be part of that community space, I'd love to have you there. Go and check out those platforms as well. So with that intro out of the way, let's get into today's video. All right, let's just start off with a little overview of the communication section to get a bird's eye view of how it works. So when we compare it to the other sections, they're worth 30% each. The communication section, it's only worth 10% of the whole exam. So it's the shortest section for you to study for. And as such, this means there's less to study for, and this video is going to be relatively short. In terms of how I studied for this section, I found it to be very similar to how I approached the ethics section. I was mainly looking at scenarios and considering how I would operate as a psychologist in a hypothetical situation. In terms of the resources, I used the good old NP textbook by Pelling and Burton. I also used Gamble and Boyle's Applied Ethics and Practical Psychology book, and I used the APS Code of Ethics. In this video, I'm going to talk about my study approach for the communication section, and then we're going to finish it off by looking at a practice exam question together. So let's get into it. So pulling up the NP curriculum for communication, you can see that there's a broad list of topics that relate to communication that we need to be familiar with, sort of similar to how the ethics domain was laid out. When you cross-check these points in the curriculum with the textbook, you'll notice that the textbook covers points 1 to 4. So it goes in depth into these 4 points. And my starting base for studying for this was basically to go through, read the textbook, and take summaries, take some notes. I actually found reading the textbook for this section really helpful, not just for the exam, also for my job. So you can see that, yeah, I have headings that correlate to the 4 main points. I only took notes of things that I thought were very relevant. I wasn't trying to memorize information, just things that I thought could be useful, like knowing what the client file was compared to the client record. I think the NP textbook gets you to think about situations that could come up and what to consider, like how you might handle it as a psychologist. However, for the final 3 points, points 5, 6, and 7, this isn't laid out in the textbook in a nice, neat package. So the other resources that really complemented learning this information I mentioned earlier, Gamble and Boyle's ethical practice book. Throughout this textbook, they have information that does relate to the communication section. Like you'll see they've got a little section specifically about communication, but I think the chapter that's kind of most relevant is chapter 11, clinical practice, so privacy legislation, records, delegation, advertising, and finances. Not everything here, but some of the things do relate to the communication section for the exam. So I think with these points, not just the last three, but all of them, if I wanted to look into something and get more detail about it or play around with a hypothetical scenario in my head, the MP textbook was a good place to do this, and also the Gamble and Boyle's textbook. It goes over tons of different ethical scenarios to consider, and I think communication does very much go hand in hand with ethics. Something else that kind of really highlights this is the APS Code of Ethics. General Principle B, propriety, goes into things like record keeping, collaborating with others, conflicting demands, issues that all relate to communication that we need to consider as psychologists. So for the communication section, I wasn't memorizing information and I didn't really take a lot of notes. I found just general reading and playing around with scenarios in my head based off of the MP curriculum was the most helpful thing for me to do in terms of learning for this section of the exam. Let's now take a quick look at a practice exam question from the MP textbook. So this is going to help you have a better sense of what I mean. You are requested to provide psychological consulting services to a manager of a youth service club based in a small rural town. Internet connection is not always reliable, and the club manager would like to communicate via regular email to discuss her strengths and leadership of the club. She will be presenting a paper on her youth work at an international conference and wants your review to inform her presentation. She suggests email as a way to stay in regular contact and asks that you send her a copy of all your notes on file. Summarize your primary concerns regarding communication with the client. So we could say 1, explicitly address internet and email security issues by installing protection software on your computer. 2, explicitly place confidential at the top of every email communication sent to the client. 3, explicitly address the issue of confidentiality before consulting with the client. 4, explicitly insist that the client obtain your permission before citing any material from the client file in her presentation. Or 5, explicitly decide not to keep a record of phone calls, text messages, and emails when communicating with the client. Which one do we pick? Looking at the question again, so summarize your primary concerns regarding communication with the client. What's most important to us here? Off the bat, I think we can cross off number 5. I think we probably will be keeping a record, so I don't think this one is the answer. Yeah, like it's important to address security, but I don't see this as being the primary issue here. Perhaps the less obvious ones are 2, 3, and 4, but I'm gonna rule out 2 and 4 because I believe 3 is the correct answer. So 3 is to explicitly address the issue of confidentiality before consulting with the client. We know that the most important thing to do with the start of our work with clients is to go over confidentiality. This is the number one priority we have before we begin any kind of therapeutic work. So we could look at number 2, we could look at number 4, we could even look at number 1 as being options of things we do to help maintain client confidentiality. But the first thing we have to do is actually address it and explain it to the client before going any further. In the textbook, this was question 61. I believe the correct answer is C. Let's see if I'm right. Hey, and I am. So it is C. So client confidentiality must be protected. The psychologist must be proactive and address all issues if there are foreseeable risks of breaches of confidentiality and seek appropriate solutions. The client and psychologist should discuss the matters before commencing the consultancy work. So in this scenario, it comes back to my knowledge of what is best practice. And I think it highlights how reading the MP textbook, Gamble and Boyle to an extent, also the APS Code of Ethics, going over these resources and just hashing out various ethical dilemmas, considering what issues could come up relating to communication and how you as a psychologist would go about resolving it. That was what really helped me prepare for the communication section of the exam. So this video was short but sweet, and we're going to leave it here, but I really hope this helps you with understanding the NP curriculum and figuring out your study approach for the communication section. Remember that if you need that extra layer of support, I do have the NP study planner. I'm going to leave a link for that in my description of this video, along with the resources I used for studying for this part of the exam, so check that out too. If you haven't seen them already, I've also created videos for the ethics assessment and intervention sections of the NP, so you might want to have a look at those. This also concludes the end of my National Psychology exam video series. I really hope you got something out of this. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I am cheering you on for this exam. You've got this, you can do it. Check out my YouTube channel if you want more resources or insight or inspiration. I hope there's some helpful stuff there as well. I will see you around. Take very good care of yourself, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!